So the first Applegate Trail immigrants get into the Willamette Valley and look around, and one of them said, "It's a beautiful valley. I'm sure we're going to be well paid for our sufferings." So then they come up, and of course they see here's this empty cabin. So they kind of use Skinner's empty cabin as just a place of refuge. So finally, they begin to get up in the Willamette Valley. By this time, the Long Tom River over here was flooding so bad there was no way to get the wagons across. So these immigrants are told, just leave your stuff here and pack north. And so most of them did. They just left their stuff there by Skinner's cabin and headed north on horses. Well, this one little group, Jim Collins, who was 13, Harrison Turney, who was a young man and a great hunter, and the Father Collins, decided to stay in Skinner's cabin. Well, unfortunately, a lot of things went wrong. It was snowing, it got cold, all the deer in that vicinity had disappeared. They did trade some cowhide to some Indians for some camas to eat, so that helped a little bit. But they were basically all starving. It was a really miserable existence, and so finally, Father Collins decided he better go up north, get food, and pack it back down because they weren't going to make it. Of course, once he left, the snow got worse, so Mr. Collins was never able to get back down. So that leaves in Skinner's cabin 13-year-old Jim, young Mr. Turney's a good hunter, and then about this time a fellow named Samuel Ruth, who was a disabled fellow who could barely walk, who had been staggering up the Applegate Trail, shows up and says, "Please, can I just come in out of the snow?" And they at first said, "No, we don't have enough food, we don't have enough room." And little 13-year-old Jim Collins said, "Oh, come on, please, let's keep him." So he gets to come in. So now we have one good hunter, Turnage, 13-year-old Jim, who's too young, and this disabled guy, Sam Ruth, who at least helped in cooking and so forth. But by this time, the game has disappeared, and then Harrison Turnage, the great hunter, comes down sick. And all of a sudden, he is sick there in the cabin. He can't hunt anymore. And so now 13-year-old Jim Collins has got to become the hunter for this sick Turnage and poor disabled Sam Ruth. So what happens is, Jim decides he's going to hunt over in Spencer Butte. Now the Amazon completely flooded the Eugene downtown area in those days. So almost everything we call Eugene today was a big lake in the middle of winter, frozen over with ice. And 13-year-old Jim has got to walk across the ice to get south of the Spencer Butte. Halfway across, the ice breaks and he falls in. So of course now he's covered with freezing water. He gets back out and he manages to get to dry land near the butte, but by this time he is so cold, he's shivering all over, that when he sees a deer, he puts up his gun and he's shaking so much and he misses it. So here he is. So he goes up and he follows up Spencer Butte looking for a deer. He doesn't see any, then all of a sudden he hears a voice call out, clear as a bell, "Thou shalt drink from the brook, and I have commanded a raven to feed you." "Thou shalt drink of the brook. I have commanded a raven to feed you." Repeats it 3 times. Now I have since found out that's actually out of the Bible, but Jim Collins heard this voice. Well, it probably was his dad, really is a memory from his father reading the Bible. So he's looking around, and all of a sudden he looks up on the hill, and my God, he hears a raven. There is this raven calling. And he looks up with his gun, and my God, there's 2 deer right there. So he turns and bang, he gets the biggest deer. He's got him, thanks to the raven. And so he goes up and he butchers that, and so then he's able to build a fire. And of course he builds a fire by shooting his gun into a wad of cotton with gunpowder. That's what people did in those days. And he roasts some of this deer and has a big deer dinner with a campfire. And he ends the story by saying, "And so there I was, was by my fire, I had enough to eat, but I was a very, very lonely little boy that night on Spencer Butte." And so that's a great story of the really beginning of Eugene. Now, of course, see then, when the spring came, they all headed north up to Polk County. And so this little Jim Collins, again, remember, he's the guy who grew up and became Judge James Layton Collins, and he wrote this story, The Pioneer Board 46, which all historians in Polk County knew about, but nobody down here had even heard of. It was thanks to Arlie Hope, the same guy who got us this book, is this, who also, therefore, told us the whole story about Jim Collins at Skinner Butte.